going on, everyone? It is Monday, October 28th, 2019, and you are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report. This is the YouTube channel dedicated to bringing you discussions on wrestling news, show recaps, and weekly events. We cover all major topics regarding professional wrestling, be it from WWE, AEW, Impact, New Japan, Ring of Honor, whatever the big topics are in the wrestling market throughout the week. They are covered right here on the FSWR YouTube channel. If you are new to the channel and you are interested in keeping up with all future content of the FSWR YouTube station, make sure you subscribe and click that little bell icon to keep up to date with all posts. In addition to that, make sure you comment and rate this video just to show your appreciation or lack thereof. Got a lot to go over today, and I want to make sure that I give myself a good amount of time to cover everything, so let's get going. And I guess now would be the appropriate time to dive into one of the more recent topics that came up over the weekend, and that is all the controversy surrounding this new design for the Jordan Myles t-shirt. Yeah, you know, Jordan Myles, the guy that won the breakout tournament, immediately challenged for the NXT title and lost, and has now completely vanished from television altogether. That Jordan Myles? Yep, same guy. Well, he took to social media over the last couple of days to spout his displeasure, shall we say, for WWE's new design of his t-shirt. And just so that I can give you a visual representation of what we are looking at here, this is the design of the prestigious Jordan Myles t-shirt. And no, not the updated one, the original version, the controversial one. It is a poorly and crappily designed black t-shirt with a big smile and the name Jordan Myles in the place of where teeth should be. And if anybody in the design department took more than maybe 5 minutes to come up with this design, I would be incredibly shocked. Anyway, Ryan Satin's report on Pro Wrestling Sheet details the extent of Jordan's tweet, as well as WWE's response to the matter. All of this taking place over the last 48 hours, basically. So Jordan tweets reads, "I will keep posting this till my voice is heard. I'm not sorry for anything I say or do. Representation is important. If this is Vince McMahon and Triple H's vision of me, then this is a slap in the face to every African-American performer, fan, and supporter." As a follow-up, Satin writes, "The NXT wrestler's frustration is due to the combination of a black shirt, red lips, and white teeth looking similar to racist blackface and Sambo imagery used to put down African Americans." Which I find odd that people are making the Sambo comparisons here, because the traditional use of the term Sambo derives from Indian heritage, believe it or not. And even if the term has been associated with historical references to African culture, it traditionally hinges on some kind of mixture within the Indian, Latin American, and African American culture. And, well, as far as I know, Jordan does not have any Indian or Latino heritage. Perhaps he does, but until we hear about that publicly, it's hearsay. So WWE put out a press release within the last 24 hours updating us on the matter, including this rather odd response. "Albert Hardy Jr., aka Jordan Myles, approved this t-shirt for sale. As always, we work collaboratively with all of our performers to develop logos and merchandise designs and get their input and approval before proceeding. This was the same process with Albert, and we responded swiftly once he later requested that the logo/t-shirt be redesigned. No t-shirts were sold." Ooh, really throwing poor Jordan under the bus here, aren't they? Now, according to the Bleacher Report article that came out recently, Jordan Myles has begun a Twitter campaign for #ForTheCulture as an organization to protest the matter. And WWE has since replaced the t-shirt design, but Myles' issue continues to be with the design of the initial shirt to begin with. Even though, according to WWE officials, Jordan was already well aware of the t-shirt design before WWE had thought of releasing it to the public for sale. So, I don't know. To me, it sounds a lot like the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. And for my money, based on what we know right now, both parties involved are doing everything they can to cast the hot iron on one another in order to save face and basically make themselves look good in the media. So I am really not sure what to make of this whole case right now. I know it's very easy to sit here and play the race card, and based on the outburst on social media, it already looks like everyone is going down that path. I personally would be a lot more comfortable reserving judgment on the matter until we hear any further updates. And I strongly encourage everyone to do the same. I understand that Jordan is very upset about this, and he has every right to be. But from where I stand right now, and based on what I'm looking at, there are way too many open-ended questions that we just don't have answers to right now that prevent me from making a conclusion over who the victim is in this case. Did Jordan really know about the t-shirt prior to the release? If he did, why did he wait until after the shirt was released to voice his frustrations? Was there a premeditated agenda here? Is the whole blackface thing blown out of proportion? Looking at it from the other hand, did WWE really go behind his back on this whole matter? Was there another design in the workings that WWE completely sabotaged? Is there a worker in the company that has it out for Jordan Myles? Was this an example of racism within the company or a fluky mistake on behalf of the design team? We don't know. And the problem, based on how WWE and Jordan are responding to this on social media, it doesn't look like one party is willing to admit who's at fault here. I will concede, however, that I do think the shirt design is absolutely hideous in every conceivable way imaginable. I'm pretty sure I made a shirt design that looked that good when I was in tech ed class in middle school. And I hated tech ed. I went to school for music. And all the while, WWE hires professional clothing designers to come up with this crap on a daily basis. I have seen better graphic t-shirt designs from dudes that run their own clothing websites and sell their stuff for like $5 a pop. WWE, on the other hand, will trot out a cheap clothing article like this and slap their logo on it and sell it for $15 to $20 a pop. So who's really getting ripped off at the end of the day? And as far as the whole thing goes with Jordan, I know it's kind of easy to sit there and say, well, why would anybody buy a Jordan Myles t-shirt to begin with? And at the end of the day, it's like, who's Jordan Myles? And I don't mean that as an insult to the guy. He's a good athlete. He's a talented wrestler. A lot of people know his work from Ring of Honor when he was ACH. But even so, if you look back historically, who was ACH? He was a guy in Ring of Honor. Good athlete. Not a whole lot of personality. As far as I remember, not a lot on the mic skills department. He was just a dude there. And now he's just a dude in WWE. I know it's kind of easy to sit there and just target him and say that no one's going to buy his t-shirt because nobody knows who he is, but at the end of the day, who is he? I don't know. It's funny to me that there's all this controversy over a guy that's made like 3 or 4 appearances on NXT and has since vanished altogether. Here's what I recommend to everyone reading into this story. Be patient and wait for more information. Unless we hear a public statement that WWE was intentionally looking to sabotage Jordan Myles based on his skin pigment, I don't think we have any reason to believe that this is a deliberate and calculated attack on Jordan or the black culture. I know it's always easy to sit there and take the cop-out approach of waiting and seeing what the results are, but in this case, I think it's the best course of action. Anyway, moving along here. I'll tell you what. For a guy that has been on record saying that he wants nothing to do with professional wrestling, specifically with WWE, the name CM Punk just never seems to leave the circle of discussion in pro wrestling. It's been going on since 2014, and here in 2019, center of a major news cycle once again. And we are now seeing reports come out that Vince McMahon is willing to let bygones be bygones and consider the idea of working with CM Punk again. This is a report that came out from the Forbes source a couple days ago. According to Sportskedia's Tom Colohue, McMahon is open to the idea of CM Punk, who recently admitted that he hadn't heard back after auditioning for a hosting role on WWE Backstage, returning to the squared circle for the world's #1 wrestling promotion. Colohue says, "Firstly, as regards to WWE Backstage, I am told by a source in Fox that CM Punk was never close to the presenting role that he applied for. The idea that WWE do not have a say in the people on their own platform is apparently very wide of the mark, and while the WWE aren't known to have outright vetoed the move, I am told that the concerns of their management team were definitely heard. I can also report that Vince McMahon himself is open to the idea of having CM Punk return to the wrestling ring. Sources tell me that Vince sees the potential to make money from CM Punk, and Vince has no problem with Punk. He would love to have him back." And we could speculate on these anonymous sources that were reporting to Colohue all we want, but I don't really think that's the important matter in this particular discussion. What is interesting about this article, as we continue reading along here, is that we are told that while Vince would be open to the idea of working with Punk again, he has no intentions of reaching out to him. He's essentially going to leave the ball in Punk's court, which I find very peculiar for a couple of different reasons, because you can interpret this a couple different ways. On the one hand, you can read that dialogue and think, well, Vince is essentially concluding that the company isn't really desperate or clamoring to have Punk back, which, if you're CM Punk and you're trying to lay out the pros and cons list of what it would be like to return to the company, you probably think, well, screw Vince. He doesn't want to negotiate first, and he's basically leaving me to extend the olive branch. Doesn't sound like he really needs me there. And when you consider the continual declining in viewership on both Raw and SmackDown, even with the move to Fox, you would think that Vince would be trying to come up with anything to get eyeballs back on the product, in not just the short term, but across a longer time span. And, while Vince likes to use that methodology of using part-time attractions for initial ratings boosts, the truth of the matter is that, as we've seen from their efforts to do so over time, it's just not sustainable. Because the truth is that, while people might tune in to watch segments with Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and Undertaker or Rock, what happens when those segments are over? The fans tune out. Because, as we've learned by WWE's attempts to use this process of writing television, former and disgruntled WWE fans will always tune in to see the big stars. But once those segments are over, they're merely left with a bunch of current talent that is nowhere near the star level of the Flairs, the Hogans, the Rocks, or the Takers. Hence, they don't stay invested. Punk is an interesting case, though, because while fans are smart enough to know that a Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, or a Rock, Baron Corbin confrontation is not going to lead to an actual match between the two, a CM Punk return would garner instant attention. One, because there's still that yearning nostalgia to see Punk work a pro wrestling match again in WWE, and two, because fans would tune in on a week-to-week basis to see what Punk would do on TV, be it cutting a promo, working physical angles with the talent, or setting up a future program to work at a pay-per-view. The result being that WWE would not be garnering short-term TV boosts in viewership, like they do when they have the part-timers around like Taker, Flair, and Hogan that only show off for a one-off appearance. But they could actually bump their viewership numbers significantly just because of the possibilities of what would happen if Punk showed up on Raw or SmackDown every couple of weeks to shoot an angle. The other thing WWE have going in their favor in this whole conversation is the fact that, considering the fallout to everything that happened with Punk's involvement with AEW recently, I mean, it's even more likely that if Punk were to return to pro wrestling, it would be in a WWE capacity, which makes Vince look even more stubborn in his refusal to contact Punk first. And to tell you the truth, a lot of this topic is hung on the idea of who will contact who first, which basically boils the story down to a battle of the egos. And the way I look at it right now, it'd be a shame to see Vince let go of this golden opportunity for him to really shake things up in the company going forward. Especially as we're seeing that this Cain Velasquez and Tyson Fury experiment isn't really garnering the publicity for them after the Fox premiere on SmackDown. So moving along here, there was another big story that broke this week involving WWE's own Randy Orton, which is actually pretty interesting at first glance because normally when I read something about Randy Orton on the internet, it's usually something involving him trolling the fans or something negligible. Well, in this particular case, Randy Orton's sort of taking the center stage right now in the battle of AEW versus WWE for viewership and talent. This is a news article that came out on Friday over at Wrestling Inc. Earlier this week, Orton posted an Instagram post of himself looking at a sign that read Elite Level with the caption, TikTok, TikTok. Orton had tagged The Revival, Luke Harper, Elias, Riddick Moss, AEW Executive Vice President Cody Rhodes, and AEW World Champion Chris Jericho in the post. This week, Dawson posted a photo of himself with Wilder and Orton and wrote, "What should have been. Thank you, Randy. We'll see you down the road." Wilder replied, "What will be, eventually." This in the reference to the trio that they had going on the SmackDown show for a little bit of time before they completely dropped it. Orton had signed a 10-year contract with WWE in 2010, and he had teased in the past that he will be free to wrestle elsewhere in the June of 2020. It's not known if Orton is simply trolling fans, is serious about possibly leaving WWE, or is using the post as a negotiation ploy, or all three. But the timing should work in Orton's favor with WWE consistently beating NXT in the ratings and so few big names being available on the market. And for me, there's a number of different ways to look at this. On the one hand, I look at what Orton's accomplished in WWE throughout his career, and how much steam he really has left under that umbrella, and the more and more I think about it, it's just really hard for me to justify Orton's utility in WWE at this point. Here's the one thing that we have to remember. Randy Orton has always been the extension of the Brock Lesnar effect. Because after Brock left WWE in 2004, the perception of Vince's model for the ideal superstar in his company drastically changed. With guys like Rock and Austin stepping down from full-time roles and Brock suddenly leaving to go pursue his UFC career. Well, moreover, his failed football experiment, then his UFC career. It basically left Vince high and dry with nobody in that upper echelon of stardom. And that basically left Vince with several guys that he knew he could build his company around in the following years. A, because they were his last-ditch effort, and B, because Vince was smart enough at the time to know that he could rely on these guys over a 5 to 10 year span, knowing that they'd be loyal to WWE, knowing that they would never grow to the Rock or Austin level of popularity, and therefore they wouldn't leave the company before Vince ever had the chance to find replacements for them. Therefore, he could structure his organization around them as top stars without them ever being megastars. And for my money, those guys were the big OVW call-ups of Batista, John Cena, and Randy Orton. To a lesser extent, you throw in guys like Taker, Jericho, Big Show, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and Edge as the contextual main eventers. The ones that Vince could always go to if he needed someone else to plug into that top scene. But Randy Orton is the interesting case because here we are. It's 2019. And out of all the guys that I just mentioned, Batista's gone, Cena's gone, Taker's barely part-time, Jericho's in AEW, Big Show's retired, Triple H is barely part-time, Shawn's retired, I think, and Edge is retired, presumably. And yes, Brock's back in WWE now, but he still only wrestles a handful of times a year. So out of this entire list here, Randy's the only guy of the bunch that is still wrestling on a full-time basis. And you think about Randy Orton, and you think about what he's done in WWE since 2002. He's like, a 13, 14-time WWE World Champion, multi-time Royal Rumble winner, main event at WrestleMania a handful of times. He's a former Money in the Bank winner. He's a multiple-time tag team and intercontinental champion. He's a recent United States champion, which is like the only thing in his 17-year tenure with the company he never accomplished. And it's the U.S. title. It doesn't mean jack squat at the end of the day anyway. I mean, when you look at these credentials, the first question you've got to ask is what's left? And for me, it's why I can't help but think that Orton might be better served testing himself in a different environment. The rotation of the main roster right now is ever increasing. Orton's kind of on his last legs with what he can really do there. The bottom line is this. Orton's been a WWE guy through and through. Statistically speaking now, he's more of a WWE guy than John Cena, which is really saying something. And granted, while Randy has never been much of a role model, shall we say, for WWE, the dude has been very loyal to the company over the past decade plus. When I think about all he's accomplished there, and when I think about the what-ifs and what-coulds of Orton working with All Elite Wrestling in the near future, I mean, it's hard to argue why Orton would want to stay with WWE. The other thing that's interesting, too, is that as of this weekend, there was a report from the Wrestling Observer newsletter that came out, which leaked Orton's salary with WWE, which is very weird timing, to say the least. And again, it really continues to bubble up the pot when it comes to him considering leaving WWE for AEW next year. I'll just read Dave's report for you. In the end, for someone like Orton, who is believed to be making in the $3 million range per year and doesn't work a full house show schedule, WWE is probably the better place. At 39, he may be able to get an even lesser schedule. Whether he's the right mix for AEW is a question, but next year, you'd think that they'd be working for a big pickup and Orton would fit that bill. There's a question if they would want to spend the money at the level for a new guy. And at the end of the day, this whole thing does boil down to the numbers negotiation. Right now, we know that Chris Jericho is the highest paid talent on the AEW roster. While numbers have never been thrown around, we've seen reports dating back to January that Jericho is presumably making more money now than he ever did throughout his WWE career. And, while Jericho's being paid very handsomely, there's always that question of whether or not throwing Orton into that equation of higher paid salaries would hinder AEW's finances in the long run. Especially when you consider the talent they're already having to pay, what would adding another top-level salary into that mix do for the other guys? Would they have to take drastic pay cuts? Would there be some kind of backlash from the other guys in the locker room? And more importantly, what would Orton's contractual requirements consist of? Would AEW require him to work a full-time schedule? Does Orton really want that going forward? These are the things that we have to take into account here. While I'm on the subject of scheduling and age, Dave talks about it in the report. Orton is just shy of 40 years old now. And, while that doesn't seem like a big deal right now, in wrestling years, he's getting closer and closer to the threshold of wear and tear on the body. While Orton's definitely not been plagued by injuries throughout his career, he's had a couple of major scares. If you all remember that awful collarbone injury back in 2007 that nearly ended his career, and even when you look at the aftermath of that injury a decade later, you ever notice that Orton was never the same athletically when he came back from that surgery? And, Orton's been on record talking about not wanting to work multiple dates and doing everything he can to have a limited road schedule, and whether that has to do with him playing his cards as a top guy in WWE or just him admitting that he can't physically withstand the WWE road schedule, the bottom line is that he's got every right to make that decision. And I just wonder, say Orton leaves in the summer of 2020 and shows up on the AEW roster next year. Okay, how long before he throws in the towel? What's his lifespan going to be like in a company like AEW at 40 years old? How long before the rigorous tear on his body catches up with him? Will Orton be able to keep up with the kind of style that the guys in AEW work, especially some of the younger athletic guys? I mean, as admirable as it is to hear that Orton would love to work with guys like Sammy Guevara, would Orton be able to keep up with him? Would it be more of a hindrance than a help? The other thing, too, and I think a lot of people are glossing over this, which is actually kind of astonishing to me, but, right now Jericho's the world champion. Obviously, their goal is to build up guys like Cody and Kenny Omega and Hangman Page and Pac and Jon Moxley and some of the upper tier talents they have to go after the world title in the future. So it's like, how does Orton fit into that equation? What would they want to do with him? Would they sit there and hotshot Orton into the title picture, completely negating everyone else they've been trying to build up? Would they have any interest in putting the title on him? Would Orton want some kind of world title run? And if not, again, what do you really do with him? See, to me, this is the thing that's been holding Randy back in WWE for all these years. It's like, he's there, yeah, but he doesn't really do a whole lot. He doesn't really contribute to the company as a main top star. He'll work programs with guys. He'll get those occasional title programs, but he's really just been spinning his wheels in the company for the last 5, almost 6 years. And I just worry that AEW would go out of their way to plunk out all this money for a big Randy Orton contract, only to have it turn out in the end that his role ends up being inconsequential. This is one of the things that held TNA back for all these years. The idea that they would sign all these top-level names for big money contracts, only to end up either not using them effectively or, in some cases, not using them at all. And while, yes, Orton would instantly be a top star in AEW, on the level of Chris Jericho's stardom, if not more, there's always going to be that lingering question of, well, what do you do with him, and what does Orton want? So, I'm interested to see what happens. With guys like the Revival looking to leave the company when their contracts expire next year, it would be kind of cool to see the three of them show up in AEW as some kind of invasion-type trio. I think you could really create a lot of buzz by shooting an angle like that on Dynamite. But there's always those other elements that you really have to look out for. I think in the short term, Orton jumping ship to AEW would instantly bring their company a lot of buzz. But, 3 to 5 years from now, when you look back at the whole deal, you got to ask, was it really worth it? And for my money, it's hard to judge one way or the other right now. All right. Well, here's when you know that I am scraping at the bottom of the barrel for wrestling topics to discuss. Apparently, Hulk Hogan got into a fan altercation this past Friday night at a hotel bar in Kansas City, Missouri. As per Paul Davis's report at Wrestling News, Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair were trying to have a drink when fans started heckling them. After Flair had presumably chased them off, Hogan says that one of the guys came back over, bought them a Shirley Temple as a way to mock them for blowing him off, which it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about it. I mean, you buy a guy a drink because he was ignoring you and wanted nothing to do with you? Seems a little counterintuitive. Anyway, Hogan says that he was leaving, and the guy came up and called him an effing male genital. I don't think you need a translator for that. And Hogan responds with the following quote, which can actually be heard and seen in the video footage taken from the dramatic scene. "I got a right to have a few moments by myself. Let me tell you something, brother. The last time I had a Shirley Temple was when me and your wife got together." By the way, I love how in the middle of this verbal confrontation, he has to include the term brother. As if he's cutting a promo for his fans in the middle of a show. Anyway, cooler heads prevailed. The fan was sent away, and Hogan ended up walking the other direction. There's actually an Instagram video from Barstool Sports that played the whole altercation in its entirety. It's really hard to make out a whole lot of the dialogue, but you can definitely hear the quote that I just read for you above in the video. And, well, basically, that's the extent of the story. Hogan cut a promo on a fan, looking like your average 80-year-old grandpa screaming at the retailer behind the counter, bad hip and all. Hogan bumbles and fumbles away on his crutch, and that's it. It was The greatest 60 seconds of WWE content you will see all year, and ironically enough, it didn't involve a single thing WWE related. Just Hulk Hogan showing that at age 60 plus, he can still convincingly threaten to beat you up, and judging by the size of this fan that he confronted, it doesn't look like Hogan would have any problem taking that guy in a heartbeat. So nothing new to report here, folks. Hogan is still the greatest of all time, despite looking older and senile by the minute. Okay, leaving the topic of WWE for the time being, AEW struck a pretty big chord over the weekend with the announcement of their most recent signing, former English boxing Olympian Anthony Ogogo. A signing that comes off the heels of WWE bringing in British boxer Tyson Fury, as well as their recent signing of former UFC star Cain Velasquez. Something tells me this is a little too expedient to be coincidental. Anyway, this comes from Joshua Hagnan's report at Wrestling Inc. Cody Rhodes made an appearance at Southside's 9th anniversary event in the UK, where he announced AEW had signed former English boxing Olympian Anthony Ogogo. Ogogo won a bronze medal, middleweight division, at the 2012 London Olympics and retired from boxing 11-1 in 2016. Rhodes later tweeted about the new signing, noting that Ogogo will be the first developmental project for AEW. What he means by developmental project, I have no idea. If he's talking about a developmental system, AEW doesn't have one of those, unless they're counting their AEW Dark show under that category, which I don't think they are. And according to the article here, they also shot an angle with him and MJF at the event. Now, there's a couple of different ways that I can look at this story. I think a lot of people are going to look at the signing and laugh at the idea that AEW is already going to the well of signing former MMA or boxing champions, yet literally weeks after WWE signed one of the biggest MMA superstars in the country, as well as the inclusion of a pretty big household name in the boxing world, that guy being Tyson Fury. And while I think it's easy to look at something like this as a knee-jerk response to what the other company is doing, I'm just trying to analyze this as if WWE isn't really a factor here. Yeah. To be honest, I'm not really all that familiar with Anthony Ogogo. And based on what I'm reading regarding his credentials and history as a boxer in the UK, he doesn't really seem to be a household name over there either. And most people are analyzing his career as the guy that got his eye socket busted so badly that he had to abruptly retire from boxing altogether. As far as pro wrestling credentials go, there's not a whole lot there. As of 2019, he's had one match with a company in his hometown called World Association of Wrestling, and that's it. He also appeared on the Road to Double or Nothing YouTube video series. Aside from that, though, there's nothing on his track record of wrestling matches. So, I'm not really sure how Anthony is going to translate over to AEW. My guess is that we probably won't see the guy wrestle on TV anytime in the near future. At least that's the hope. Unless the guy's ready for prime time, which I can't imagine he is right now. With having less matches than you can count on one hand, I don't think there's a reason to rush to get the guy on TV right now. And the thing that concerns me with the Ogogo not really being that popular of a star, both in the States and over in the UK, I'm not really sure how his eventual debut will impact AEW, if at all. Which then begs the question of why sign him. I just think, with all the talent out there right now, be it in companies like ROH and Impact and other indie feds, I guess I'm just having trouble wrapping my brain around the idea of having to go to the MMA fighters and former boxers realm right now. Especially when the guy you're bringing in doesn't have a whole lot of name recognition. I will say it's definitely good to have a guy like this for the foreseeable future, especially if your goal is to try and present different varieties and styles of pro wrestling. This was something that MLW had going in its favor, even though they never presented it as effectively as they should have. It was the fact that they showcased different styles of wrestling from time to time, which is why I always enjoyed watching guys like Timothy Thatcher and Tom Lawler, because I knew that when I saw them work matches, I was going to see a more technical / MMA style approach to their matches, even if I'm not a huge MMA fan. Especially with AEW having guys like Jake Hager under contract now, And if they were ever to book a Hager Ogogo program down the road, I think there'd be a lot of instant appeal of the two former MMA guys bringing in a different element of pro wrestling, which is something that we are not really always accustomed to seeing in modern pro wrestling. All in all, it's hard for me to make heads or tails of the whole story right now. Judging how Cody's introducing him to the company, what with him being brought in as AEW's first developmental signee, I'd bet a good hand that they'll probably keep Ogogo off TV until he gets more comfortable with the basics in the ring. There's always that fear of them rushing him to TV too soon out of desperation, but with the stacked roster AEW has right now and all the talent they're currently trying to get over, I don't think there's a reason to throw another guy into the fold right now. Maybe a year or so down the road, you bring the guy up and have him work an angle. For right now, I don't think there's any reason to have Ogogo be on the program, especially when he's still green and very new to the business. Okay, real quick, I want to run down WWE's Crown Jewel card, the show that is coming up this Thursday, October 31st. That's right, Halloween night. WWE is going to be overseas getting that Saudi money. Meanwhile, all WWE talent's friends and families will be over in the States trick-or-treating. Because, where else would WWE talent want to be on a Halloween night other than working a publicity stunt pay-per-view on the other side of the world? Sounds about accurate to me. Anyway, Thursday this week is also my day off. And for those of you wondering whether or not I plan on watching said publicity stunt event, the answer to that is a resounding hell no. However, for those of you that are seeking interest in this show, allow for me to run down the show for you in its entirety and give you my initial thoughts heading into the show. On this card for Thursday, we have a 10-man tag match featuring Team Hogan, which consists of Roman Reigns, Rusev, Ricochet, Shorty G, there's a name for the record books, and Ali, versus Team Flair, which consists of Randy Orton, Baron Corbin, Bobby Lashley, Shinsuke Nakamura, and Drew McIntyre. Whether or not this is a Survivor Series style match with elimination rules, I have no idea. There's no specification on the wiki page. Babyfaces going over here is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Although with WWE, you never know. They could have the match boil down to Chad Gable and all the heels just so that they can all beat him up and make him look like a complete moron. Braun Strowman versus Tyson Fury. And if I'm not mistaken, this will be Fury's one and only match with WWE, at least for the time being. So if I had to guess, I would presume Strowman goes over. How he goes over, I have no idea, but I guess that's the intrigue of watching the show to find out what happens. Brock Lesnar versus Cain Velasquez for the WWE Championship. This is probably the match with most intrigue going in. In the FSWR edition where I talked about the Cain Velasquez signing, I mentioned that WWE would be best suited to have Cain win the title from Brock at this show and then build up to a big Mania rematch next year. I'm not going to hold my breath that they would have Cain win the title overseas, even though they would be wise to do so, but I guess we'll see there. Also, we have Mansoor versus Cesaro. Mansoor's probably going over there because that's all Cesaro does is job on WWE programming anymore. Unless he's wrestling in the UK, and he'll go over somebody, but on WWE programming, nah, he's always losing. We also have a 9-man tag team turmoil for the WWE World Cup. You got Big E and Kofi, Viking Raiders, Heavy Machinery, Lucha House Party, Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder, The Revival, The OC, Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode, and The B-Team. Sounds like a cluster you-know-what in the making. As far as who goes over, I honestly have no idea. I read a rumor report that came out the other night about WWE thinking about turning the New Day heel in the future. So, who knows? They'll probably have Big E and Kofi win just so they can have one of them turn on the other in the coming weeks. Gotta get that heat. Then, coming off the heels of the worst professional wrestling match I have seen since Taker and Goldberg earlier this year, which coincidentally enough happened at the last Saudi Arabia show in June, we've got Seth Rollins versus The Fiend in a Falls Count Anywhere match for the Universal Championship, with the added stipulation that, and I quote here, the match cannot be stopped for any reason. So I guess that includes the possibility of Seth bashing in Bray's skull with a sledgehammer this time. I like how they have to go out of their way to include the statement that the match cannot be stopped for any reason. It's like they know the ending to the Hell in a Cell show was so ungodly horrible that they have to provide damage control so that fans can prep their outrage before the show even happens. Anyway, as far as who wins, I don't know. Seth will probably retain because Vince is destined to kill off anything good that ever comes across his path, up to and including the best thing that they've had on the main roster all year in Bray Wyatt. Plus their continual journey to make Seth Rollins the most unlikable babyface in WWE history, which is really saying something since Roman Reigns was a thing that happened not too long ago. They also have a battle royal booked with the winner getting to challenge AJ for the United States title, with none of the participants being announced, by the way. Yeah, I know. Very enticing. And I guess AJ will defend the title against the winner on that same show. Cool. Hey, if you're checking the show out, awesome sauce. Let me know how it goes. I mean, the only thing that I'd really like to read up is how they conclude the Brock-Kane match. It'd be great to see Kane squash Brock in like 30 seconds and win the title and, really develop their program into next year. I could also see them beating Kane in his first WWE match just because. So, the intrigue is there. How much of it is there, I have no idea, but there is a little bit of intrigue. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for this comatose edition of the FSWR edition. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to stay tuned in for future episodes, make sure you subscribe and click that little bell icon to keep up with all notifications. Again, that is 2 uploads we have every week on this channel. Monday is our news coverage edition, and Friday is our review series edition, where once again we cover NWA, AEW, and NXT. Hope to have you back this coming Friday for that. Should be a very fun edition. Until then, have a good rest of the week, everyone.